Greetings, taxable assets, or should I say collateral damage.
Processing recording parameters, Senior Auditor, we are live.
Good. The civilian contractor Tabletop Tactics has sent us this absolute garbage. A battle report designated New Units Tyranids versus Tau Empire. It is a textbook display of penny stock violence and, frankly, gross tactical insolvency.
I have the source documents ready for cross-referencing, Lord Krauss.
You have been found severely lacking in your tithings to the strategic archives of Beyond the Bolter. To rectify this spiritual and tactical deficit, you must strike the like button and engage the notification bell immediately. This is not a request, citizens. It is a required protocol to ensure your databanks remain current and to halt these glass-brained battlefield maneuvers.
Warning, viewer retention metrics suggest...
I do not care about the metrics, Servitor. If left unchecked, this profound intellectual rot will inevitably deposit you at the front doors of Vanguard Tactics or Art of War 40k. There, they will happily exact a $500 toll for a rudimentary coaching course, exploiting a structural failure born entirely of your own abysmal attention spans.
The required course fees are indeed exorbitant for the average civilian.
You find yourselves in this deficit simply because you are too busy snorting substandard corpse starch, rendering you physically incapable of sitting still and listening to Valarius Krauss for a measly 45 minutes. Heed this audit. Absorb the mathematics. Cease making these catastrophic, glass-brained mistakes and stop getting yourselves mathematically tabled.
Initializing the primary ledger now, Senior Auditor.
Our mission today is simple. We will take the civilian pick capture from Tabletop Tactics and audit it line by line, phase by phase, against the Departamento Analytica's internal hold-down PDF document to prove exactly why this specific strategy is mathematically bankrupt. I want every single one of you listening to this broadcast to pay very close attention to the math we are about to present, because this is exactly where you lose your weekend tournaments.
Shall I open the deployment data?
Yes, open it. You deploy these identical, fundamentally flawed unit synergies without even realizing the economic deficit you are creating on the board. Now, Scribe, open the primary ledger. Let us gaze into the abyss of this tactical bankruptcy. Read the initial asset deployment of the Tau retaliation cadre against the Tyranid subterranean assault. And do try to articulate clearly. My patience is already operating at a severe deficit today.
Initiating data retrieval from the civilian pick capture and cross-referencing with the hold-down PDF, Senior Auditor. The Tau commander, designated James, deployed a retaliation cadre detachment.
Go on, read the anchor points.
His primary anchor consisted of 2 Riptide Battlesuits and 2 Ghostkeel Battlesuits deployed aggressively near the midboard deployment line. In his own backline, he anchored the new 160-point Twin Battlesuit characters, designated Dez and Troy.
Dez and Troy. The nomenclature alone is a liability. Continue.
According to the civilian transcript at timestamp 4 minutes and 12 seconds, Commander James intended to utilize the twins as what the documentation calls a scalpel to protect his standard strike teams and pathfinders from deep-striking biologicals.
Oof, Emperor preserve me. I need a drink of this awful recap just to process that sentence.
The logic was clearly stated in the plate.
Putting a 34-inch mobility unit in the back line to babysit static infantry is a zombie loop of intellectual bankruptcy.
Shall I continue with the Tyranid deployment matrix, Lord Krauss? The Tyranid commander, designated Katie, utilized...
No, Servitor, you shall not continue. You shall halt your processing routines and stand there while we process the sheer magnitude of the strategic idiocy you have just read into the official record.
Halting routines. Awaiting analytical input.
Let us unpack the illusion of this specific datasheet, because the broader civilian community is currently drowning in a manufacturer-induced mass delusion. The community looks at the Twin Lance, these Dez and Troy characters, and they see a 160-point Vanguard Assassin.
They do feature twin fusion colliders and rapid-fire pulse pistols, Senior Auditor.
They look at the physical plastic model, yes. They see those weapons, and they see a unit designed to drop violently behind enemy lines, surgically extract high-value tactical assets, and vanish. But what did the Tau commander actually do with them on the physical geometry of the board?
As previously stated, he anchored them in his deployment zone.
He anchored them. He tethered a highly mobile reactive asset to baseline biological infantry that possesses the tactical velocity of a wounded geriatric grox. We must mathematically calculate the concept of theoretical evasion versus the anchor effect. Scribe, step to the chalkboard.
Approaching the analytical chalkboard.
Pulled up the exact movement parameters from the datasheet. What is the theoretical maximum velocity, what we in the Analytica refer to as Vmax, of this unit in a single battle round?
Accessing detachment stratagems and datasheet innates now, Senior Auditor. The mathematical vectors are as follows. The Twin Lance possesses an innate 8-inch scout move prior to the first battle round.
Write that down. 8.
They possess a standard movement profile of 10 inches during the movement phase.
10. Keep adding.
Under the specific rules of the Retaliation Cadre Detachment, they can utilize the Torch Star Gambit stratagem for a further 10-inch normal move immediately after shooting.
Another 10?
Furthermore, their innate datasheet rule, Dynamic Evasion, allows for a 6-inch repositioning move after resolving their shooting or fight phase.
Compile it. Combine those disparate vectors into a single operational turn. What is the sum?
Compiling the data. The sum, Lord Krauss, is 34 inches.
The sum servitor is 34 inches. 30 inches. Vmax equals 34 inches of physical board control per turn. Listen to me carefully, you civilians out there in the dark. I want you to visualize the standard physical dimensions of a competitive Warhammer 40,000 battlefield.
Standard dimensions are 44 inches deep by 60 inches wide.
Exactly. The total area of the board is 2,640 square inches. If you calculate the radius of a 34-inch threat range, the area of influence that this single unit can theoretically touch in one turn is over 3,600 square inches. Scribe.
Yes, Lord Krauss.
Their maximum theoretical evasion range literally exceeds the total square inch physical area of the entire board. Theoretically, this unit should dictate the entire geometric reality of the engagement.
The math indicates they should be uncatchable.
They should operate as a phantom tax levied upon the enemy's flanks, forcing the Tyranid player to second-guess every single advancement, because the twins could be anywhere at any time. Yet, as we observed in this agonizing display of penny stock violence, how are they utilized?
They were deployed in the physical deployment zone, senior auditor, approximately 3 inches behind a ruined manufactorum wall, maintaining coherency with a unit of baseline pathfinders.
Exactly. They were effectively anchored. They were trapped in their own deployment zone, ordered by their commander to babysit fire warriors, strike teams, just to push a pathetic 12 inches over the course of the entire multi-hour engagement.
This does seem to limit their potential energy output.
When you mismanage your spatial geometry to this profound degree, a 160-point hypermobility unit becomes a mathematically inefficient static turret. Commander James allowed the Tyranid swarm to dictate the engagement radius.
By keeping the twins tied to static, 60-point observers in the backline.
He forcibly tethered a precision spearhead unit to an iron anchor. It is a fundamental structural misunderstanding of basic resource allocation.
But Lord Krauss, providing pushback based on the source text, the civilian commander explicitly stated in the primary source video that the twins were, quote, very exciting, and that they could fight, they can zoom, they can run away bravely. Does their emotional enthusiasm not count toward the unit's efficacy?
I do not care about the emotional state of the civilian contractor, servitor. I care about the ledger. And the ledger shows a commander who paid a premium manufacturer's tax for hypermobility and close-quarters execution, only to use them as a defensive sandbag.
The tactical application does contradict the datasheet design.
And why? Because he lacked the intellectual fortitude to project a proper deep strike denial zone with his actual heavy mecha. Let me explain this in terms a child could grasp. Pay attention. Collateral damage.
Awaiting instructional dictation.
A deep strike denial zone is a basic principle of board control. You space your cheap, expendable units out in a 9-inch geometric web to physically prevent the enemy from placing their reserves on the board. You do not use your 160-point premium assassin unit to sit in the back and wait for a Mawloc to pop up.
This aligns with our internal doctrines regarding localized screening.
That is called phase-locked economy, where your points are doing absolutely nothing until the enemy decides to interact with them. It is strategic passivity, and it is disgusting. Scribe, turn the page to the execution phase.
Turning to Turn 1 execution protocols.
Read me the unvarnished data from Battle Round 1, where these heavily subsidized battlesuits actually discharge their weapon profiles. Let us audit their lethality.
Tabulating Turn 1 execution protocols from the civilian picked capture. The Tyranid commander, Katie, moved a unit of Genestealers into the midboard.
A standard biological push.
The twins dropped into engagement range via deep strike. Because they landed within 9 inches of the target, they achieved the optimal retaliation cadre detachment buffs of +1 strength and +1 armor penetration to all ranged weapons.
Excellent. The absolute ideal scenario. Keep reading.
Furthermore, they were guided by a unit of stealth suits, utilizing the for the greater good army rule, granting the twins rerolls of 1 to hit, and crucially, rerolls of 1 to wound.
Pause right there. I want the listeners to understand the sheer magnitude of the mathematical advantages currently stacked in favor of the Tau unit. They have deep struck perfectly.
They are within the 9-inch optimal kill zone.
They have full detachment buffs. They have full Army Rule spotter buffs. They're operating in what we in the Analytica call the White Room scenario, absolute, uncontested mathematical optimization. Continue, Scribe. What did they fire, and what was the target?
They directed their entire payload into a 10-man unit of baseline Tyranid Genestealers led by a Broodlord.
The payload.
The payload consisted of cyclic ion scatter cannons, fusion eliminators, and pulse pistols equipped with the Sustained Hits Universal Special Rule. The Genestealer biological profile possesses a toughness characteristic of 4, 1 wound each, and a 5+ invulnerable save.
Ugh, just taking a sip of this horrid recap. Swallowing that data is just as bad. Failing to liquidate baseline biologicals with maximum buffs is not a weapon profile, Scribe. It's a rounding error.
Does this mean the physical dice rolls were simply statistically anomalous, Senior Auditor? Bad luck on the part of the Tau commander?
No, you malfunctioning abacus. It means the entire unit architecture is functionally and fundamentally deficient. I will not accept bad luck as an excuse in this department.
Probability curves dictate that luck is a non-factor over a sufficient sample size.
We deal in averages. We deal in expected outcomes over thousands of simulated engagements. Break down the mathematics for the listeners right now. These so-called tactical savants who sit in their local hobby stores watching fists full of dice being rolled and mistake the loud clattering sound for actual lethality. Do the math out loud, servitor. Calculate the baseline ballistics and accepted wound yield.
Processing. The twins possess cyclic ion scatter cannons. Let us assume an average of 7 shots total from the combined platforms.
7 shots. Proceed.
Hitting on 3s with rerolls of 1 from the stealth suit spotters yields an effective hit probability of 77.7%. This results in approximately 5.4 hits.
5.4 hits. Now the wound roll.
With the strength enhanced to 8 via the detachment rule, wounding toughness for Genestealers requires a die roll of 2 or higher. This is an 83% success rate. Rerolling ones pushes this to 97%. We can expect 5.2 wounds.
Stop right there. 5.2 wounds. Now, factor in the Tyranid defensive profile.
Factoring in defensive profiles.
The armor penetration of the cyclic ion cannon is improved to AP-2 by the detachment buff. But the Genestealers possess a 5+ invulnerable save. This means the AP value is entirely negated past a certain threshold. The Tyranid biological simply ignores 1/3 of all successful wounds, regardless of how much plasma you pump into them.
Calculating invulnerable save mitigation, the Genestealers will successfully save 33% of the incoming damage.
So what is the final yield?
The expected final damage yield from the cyclic ion cannons is 3.4 dead Genestealers. If we add the expected yield of the fusion eliminators and the sustained hits pulse pistols, calculating for the same 5+ invulnerable save, the total expected biological casualties equate to roughly 6.8 Genestealers.
6.8. Let us round up to 7 out of sheer bureaucratic generosity. A unit designed purely for close-range execution, operating under absolute optimal conditions, fully buffed by their specific detachment rules, mathematically supported by a dedicated spotter unit, unloaded every single piece of ordnance they carried into standard 1-wound biological infantry.
And the recorded outcome in the civilian document.
And what happened in the reality of the battle report? The Genestealers survived. A Broodlord survived. The Tyranid commander simply rolled her basic 5+ invulnerable saves, and the mathematically deficient wound conversion rate of the twins was exposed for the entire galaxy to see.
Reviewing the source transcript, Lord Krauss, the civilian Tau commander seemed quite pleased with this outcome.
Pleased.
At timestamp 22 minutes, he explicitly noted that they killed 4 of them with the pistols alone and stated it was, quote, pretty good going so far.
Pretty good going. Scribe, if I ever hear you utilize the phrase pretty good going to describe a failure to achieve absolute biological liquidation on a baseline priority target, I will have your vocal processors forcibly removed and replaced with a faulty static-filled voxcaster from a derelict Astra Militarum chimera.
I will strike the phrase from my vocabulary subroutine, Senior Auditor.
The gloss-brained public cheers because they see sustained hits prosing on the pulse pistols. They see a massive volume of plastic dice being gathered up in the commander's hands. But Warhammer 40,000 is an intellectual exercise in finite resource management, not a slot machine in a low-orbit casino.
The visual spectacle often overrides empirical analysis in civilian settings.
The actual wound conversion rate bounced harmlessly off a meager invulnerable save. If your heavily specialized, heavily marketed, close-quarters scalpel unit cannot wipe out a unit of Toughness 4 Genestealers without outside assistance, then it is not an executioner unit. It is a painted paperweight pretending to be a threat.
But Senior Auditor, the Tabletop Tactics hold-down PDF explicitly states later in the document that the Twins secured 12 secondary victory points simply by surviving the engagement and performing actions. Does that not mathematically offset their 160-point initial cost?
You not quote civilian cope at me, Servitor. 12 victory points generated passively over a 5-turn game clock does not erase a 500-point systemic deficit created in the midboard. Which brings us perfectly to the core of this tactical catastrophe.
The macroeconomic state of the board, Lord Krauss.
The systemic cost of fielding this garbage. Turn the page in the ledger, scribe, detail the mid-game. Battle rounds 2 and 3. We need to look at the macroeconomic state of the board. What exactly happened to the rest of the Tal Empire's operational assets, while the Twins were busy failing to kill biological chaff in the deployment zone?
Accessing battle rounds 2 and 3, Lord Krauss. The Tyranid player executed the primary phase of the Subterranean Assault Detachment. Massive biological assets, specifically Mawlocs and a Trigon Prime, emerged from Deep Strike directly into the Tal lines.
A total breach of the physical front.
Simultaneously, a heavily armored Norn emissary advanced upon the central midboard objective. To counter this, the Tau heavy mecha, specifically the 2 Riptides and 2 Ghostkeel stationed at the front, were engaged in heavy, close-quarters attrition.
And what was the outcome of that attrition?
During these rounds, the Riptides and Ghostkeels absorbed massive localized damage from Tyranid psychic warp blasts and melee appendages, and were systematically destroyed.
And the Twins, our vaunted 160-point assassins.
Simultaneously, the Twin Lance utilized their innate 6-inch post-shooting maneuver to fall back behind the safety of high-terrain ruins, avoiding the Tyranid macro threats entirely.
Just slamming my datapad on this desk. Over and over. This is standard operational doctrine, Scribe. Listen closely because this is basic military economics. A baseline 60-point pawn steps on the landmine so that the 160-point knight can survive and strike the king. Baseline 60-point infantry exists to die for heavy mecha.
That is the established exchange rate in the Departamento Analytica.
Reversing this relationship, having your premium heavy support chassis die to screen for a localized skirmisher is a catastrophic violation of ledger. We call this the meat shield inversion.
I do not fully comprehend, Senior Auditor. The standard logic of the civilian sector implies that preserving character units is paramount.
They are wrong.
Did the Twins not perform their duty by surviving the mid-game and securing the primary objective zone, as a civilian commander boasted on camera?
You do not comprehend because your neural pathways are currently clogged with manufacturer propaganda. The manufacturer wants you to believe the shiny characters must survive at all costs. To the chalkboard again, Scribe, wipe the VMAX data.
Wiping the chalkboard.
We are going to calculate the total systemic burden equation for the listeners, capital B subscript SASs. The civilians out there look at the Twin Lance datasheet and they see a printed point cost of 160 points. That is the C base, the base cost.
160 points.
It is an absolute illusion. It is a marketing lie sold by the manufacturer to trick gullible, statistically illiterate commanders into thinking they're buying a cheap, self-sufficient asset. Write the equation out, Scribe.
Engaging tactile manipulators. Writing equation on the chalkboard. B-sys equals C-base, which is 160 points.
Now add T-spotter, the spotter tax. The Twins' volume of fire, as we just established in excruciating detail with the Genestealer incident, is completely inefficient natively. They hit on 3s, but their wound conversion against anything tougher than wet tissue paper is abysmal.
They statistically fail against hardened targets.
They mathematically require re-rolls of 1 to wound to even attempt to push damage through a basic invulnerable save. Therefore, the Tau commander was forced, by the mechanical design of his own army, to deploy a 60-point unit of stealth suits solely to act as an observer for them.
60 points permanently tethered.
That is 60 points of finite economy permanently tethered to the Twins just to make their datasheets function at a baseline level. We are now at 220 points of total investment.
Adding T-spotter to the ledger, Lord Krauss, B-sys equals 160 plus 60.
Now add T-hoc, the ad hoc liquidation tax. Pay close attention, collateral damage, because this is the most damning variable of all, and it is where all of you lose your games in the deployment phase.
Expanding the equation variable list.
The Twins operate with 18-inch cyclic ion cannons and 12-inch fusion eliminators. But to unlock the retaliation cadre detachment buffs, the +1 strength and +1 AP that they absolutely need to kill anything, they must cross the 9-inch threshold of their target.
The optimal kill zone.
This means their liquidation phase is fundamentally delayed. They are reactive by design. They cannot shoot the enemy turn 1 if the enemy hides. They cannot shoot turn 2 if they are hiding behind ruins to survive. During this multi-turn delay, the Tyranid swarm is actively dismantling the Tau front line.
The Riptides. Senior Auditor.
Exactly. The Tau commander had to sacrifice a Riptide, a 180-point heavy mecha chassis, just to buy the spatial runway, the sheer physical board presence, so the Twins could safely get within 9 inches of the Tyranid backline without being immediately charged and consumed by a Trigon.
Spatial runway acquired through systemic sacrifice.
The Riptide was the physical anvil that had to be shattered into 1,000 pieces, so the scalpel could make a single, inefficient cut on turn 3. It is an inversion of basic economic survival. Add 180 points to the ledger, Scrub.
Besis now totals 400 points, Senior Auditor. The deficit is climbing rapidly.
We are not done. Add 2 rescue, the rescue tax. Because the Twins failed to liquidate the Genestealers on turn 1, and because they hid behind ruins while the Riptides died on turns 2 and 3, the Tyranid biological mass successfully collapsed the deployment zone.
Total structural failure of the backline.
The Twins did not hold the line. They ceded physical control of the board. Therefore, Commander Farsight, a 105-point Supreme Commander model, had to be rapidly ingressed and utilized as an emergency plug in a leaking dam.
Farsight committed to the engagement zone.
Farsight and his unit of Sunforged Battlesuits had to drop in from orbit and physically destroy the Mawloc and the Hive Tyrant that were overrunning the lines. Farsight paid the rescue tax, purely because the Twins could not anchor the space they physically occupied. Add 105 points. Calculated, Scribe. What is the total systemic burden of fueling this unit?
Processing the final arithmetic sum of the systemic burden equation. Besis equals 160 base, plus 60 for the spotter tax, plus 180 for the ad hoc spatial sacrifice of the Riptide, plus 105 for the emergency rescue operation by Commander Farsight. The total systemic burden is 505 points, Lord Krauss.
505 points. Over a quarter of the entire Army's standard competitive point limit. The Tau commander was forced to orbit over 500 points of his Army's finite economy, just to facilitate a single 160-point vanity project unit that still failed to clear its primary biological targets on the initial drop.
This represents a massive misallocation of resources.
This is exactly why the Tau gun line collapsed in the mid-game. This is why they were bleeding macro assets across the center of the board. Commander James paid an exorbitant cascading systemic tax for a unit that generates a negative return on investment when forced into a defensive posture. It is a compounding tax of sheer tactical incompetence, and it makes my blood boil to watch it celebrated in a public pick feed.
Your biometrics indicate elevated stress levels, Senior Auditor.
Just look at this requisition form. Scribe, look at it. I cannot even properly document the systemic multi-sector failure because the Department of Analytica has slashed our operational budget again. Taste this recaf. The sludge they are serving in the mess hall tastes like Prometheum engine runoff that has been aggressively filtered through an orc's unwashed loincloth.
It does appear highly viscous today.
And listen to that, the rattling. The ventilation fan above my desk sounds like a dying grox caught in a grain thresher. How am I supposed to calculate precise probabilistic outcomes of plasma dispersion when it sounds like an artillery barrage inside my own office?
The decibel level is above standard operating tolerances.
And do you know what the Munitorum is currently charging for a single standard vial of departmental-issue black quill ink? It is bankrupting my department. We are auditing the multi-sector tactical failures of the entire galaxy, and I am forced to manually transcribe my findings with ink that costs more per ounce than refined adamantium.
I can attempt to file Form 88-B to requisition a new ventilation fan from the Munitorum Supply Depot, Lord Krauss. It may take 3 to 4 standard Terra months.
Do not interrupt my misery with your bureaucratic optimism, Servitor. You think this office is bad. Listen to me, you uncredentialed civilian serfs currently listening to this podcast. Yes, you. The ones currently sitting in your hab blocks drafting a furious, aggressively misspelled response in the comment section below this pick feed.
Civilian engagement metrics often correlate with negative emotional responses.
I challenge you. I expect explicitly and directly challenge you to pause this agitator feed right now and post a comment correcting my math on the Tau point efficiency. Go ahead. Let's see your formulas. Because you civilians always think you know best. You read a community forum post on Reddit for 5 minutes while sitting on the latrine, and suddenly you believe you can do my job better than me.
They lack access to the primary Analytica databanks.
You think you understand point liquidity. You think you grasp the macroeconomic realities of a fully optimized 2,000-point tabletop engagement. Prove it. Tell me how orbiting 500 points of support structure to prop up a unit that bounces off a 5+ invulnerable save is a winning competitive strategy. I will wait.
Shall I activate the chronometer?
Actually, I won't, because your inevitable replies will be as intellectually bankrupt as the battle report we are currently auditing. Scribe. Return to the ledger. We must document the tragedy of Turn 4.
Yes, Senior Auditor. Initiating Turn 4 review protocols, recentering focus on the deployment zone collapse. The Tyranid biological mass, specifically the subterranean elements, had fully breached the Tau deployment zone.
The perimeter was shattered.
A Mawloc and a Hive Tyrant, possessing significant physical bulk and melee lethality, were threatening total envelopment of the Tau backline objective. As noted previously, Commander Farsight and his dedicated unit of Sunforged Battlesuits were forced to fully commit to the sector.
And what did Farsight actually do?
Utilizing their high-yield plasma and fusion weaponry, which inherently re-roll wound rolls against high-toughness targets, Farsight managed to successfully execute both the Hive Tyrant and the Mawloc. The civilian transcript notes this as a heroic last stand that effectively halted the total collapse of the Tau lines.
Slamming my desk drawer shut. We do not use the term heroic in this office, Scribe. We define this entirely as the rescue tax. Farsight plugging the front line is the exact mathematical equivalent of requiring a super-heavy Astra Militarum Baneblade to bail out a single squad of Vanguard veterans from a localized street skirmish they foolishly initiated.
Is this what the Analytica refers to as the Baneblade anomaly, Lord Krauss?
Precisely, Servitor. The Baneblade anomaly is a concept of disproportionate response driven by primary failure. If a Space Marine requires a multi-million credit Questoris Knight or a Baneblade tank to save them from a localized firefight they picked, then the Space Marine has fundamentally failed their operational mandate.
The macro asset is forced to abandon its primary mission.
To solve a micro problem. Exactly. This translates perfectly to the Tau architectural failure we witnessed in this game. The Twin Lance is priced, marketed, and theoretically deployed as a self-sufficient interceptor. They are meant to surgically remove threats before they breach the lines.
But the breach occurred regardless.
What actually happened in the harsh reality of the physical board? Commander Farsight had to burn a crucial rapid ingress stratagem from the skies, spending a command point and his own structural integrity simply to save the Twin Lance and the backline Pathfinders from a Tyranid swarm that the Twins had fundamentally failed to liquidate on Turn 1.
A reactive deployment caused by upstream inefficiency.
The systemic collapse was total. The Tau commander was spending macro-level, high-impact assets to fix micro-level incompetence.
But, Senior Auditor, I must provide pushback based on the public consensus. The civilian community forums, the comment sections, and the broader network of tactical influencers dictate that the Twins won the game for the Tau.
They dictate what?
The prevailing narrative attributes the victory entirely to the deployment of these new plastic models.
The White Room orthodoxy of the broader 40k community is a literal plague upon my sanity, Scribe. These influencers, these so-called community analysts with their ring lights and their sponsored paint racks, they operate entirely in a vacuum.
They do not account for compounding variables on the board.
They assume a theoretical optimal condition where every single plasma shot hits, every single wound perfectly converts, and every single enemy target conveniently fails his armor save. They attribute the victory to the Twins solely because the Twins are the new shiny commodity the manufacturer explicitly wishes to sell this fiscal quarter.
Economic bias in their tactical reporting.
They willfully, almost criminally, ignore the hard empirical data of the ledger. The actual heavy lifting, the true anchor of that entire game, was Commander Farsight. Farsight's localized damage output in that specific sector was the only mathematical variable preventing a total Tyranid rout. He performed the bailout.
How, then, from an analytical perspective, should a competent Tau commander have logically structured the liquidation matrix to avoid this deficit, Senior Auditor?
By utilizing what we call the proactive economic model. Let us do a side-by-side comparison. Let us compare the heavily taxed Twin Lance to the venerable, reliable, broadside Battlesuit. Scribe, Pull up the current Munitorum point cost and ballistic capability of an optimized broadside unit. Read it into the record.
Accessing current Tau Empire datasheets. A standard 2-model broadside battlesuit unit paired with a dedicated low-cost spotter unit such as Kroot Hounds or minimal stealth suits costs approximately 240 points of total army economy.
240 points. A solid, finite investment, and their armaments.
They are primarily equipped with heavy rail rifles. These weapons are capable of projecting Strength 12, Armor Penetration -4, with a damage profile of D6+1 across a massive 60-inch physical threat range.
Correct. Listen to those numbers, citizens. For 240 points of fully realized self-sufficient economy, you project extreme macro-threat lethality across the entire physical geometry of the board starting on Battle Round 1. You do not wait for the enemy to deep strike.
The threat projection is immediate.
You do not hide behind a ruined wall. By the time the biological swarm reaches your physical deployment lines, their operational capacity has been mathematically degraded by constant high-velocity railgun fire. They are bleeding, crippled, or entirely dead before they can even swing a single melee appendage.
A clear advantage of the proactive economic model.
The twins, conversely, cost 160 points on paper, but practically require a 500-point systemic support structure just to survive long enough to apply their ad hoc liquidation tax at a highly dangerous 18-inch range. They are a reactive burden on the army list.
Reactive lethality versus proactive lethality.
Proactive lethality will always, unequivocally, mathematically dominate reactive lethality in a game rigidly dictated by a 5-turn clock. And speaking of that clock, Scribe. Read the final outcome, turn 5.
Processing final engagement metrics from the civilian source, Lord Krauss. The game concluded formally at the end of turn 5. The Tau Empire secured victory via a higher accumulation of primary and secondary victory points.
And how did the Tyranid player spend her final turn?
In the final concluding rounds, the Tyranid commander, Katie, focused her high-value ranged attacks, specifically the warp blasts from her zoanthropes and the Norn emissary's psychic output, directly into the 4+ invulnerable saves of the remaining Riptides and Ghostkeels.
Unbelievable.
According to the movement logs, she mathematically avoided targeting the Twin Lance entirely, allowing them to score secondary objectives uncontested.
Just a low rumbling chuckle here that's turning into a cough. All the air quality in this office. A victory by the bell is not tactical brilliance, Scribe. It is merely a symptom of a delayed strategic collapse.
But the primary ledger shows a conclusive win, Senior Auditor. The victory points favor the Tau Empire. The mission was accomplished.
The ledger shows a Pyrrhic survival sustained solely by the mechanical, artificial constraints of the game clock. Let us perform the final audit synthesis right now. Why did the Tau actually win this specific engagement?
Awaiting synthesis parameters.
Because of the Tyranid player's psychological asymmetry. She did not play against the mathematical reality of the board. She played against the internet hype of the twins, not the raw, deficient numbers printed on the datasheet. She allowed the artificial, manufacturer-driven fear of a brand new release to completely overwrite her own empirical observation of the game state.
But Senior Auditor, she explicitly observed their statistical failure in turn 1 when they failed to liquidate her Genestealers.
Exactly. That is the tragedy of it all. She watched with her own eyes as the twins unloaded their fully buffed, mechanically optimized payload into Toughness 4 biologicals and completely failed to wipe them out. The psychological illusion of their lethality should have instantly shattered right then and there.
The data was presented to her directly via dice rolls.
A commander operating purely on cold mathematics, devoid of emotion or marketing bias, would have instantly realized that a unit lacking the basic lethality to clear baseline infantry poses zero mathematical threat to macro assets like a Toughness 11 Norn emissary or a Hive Tyrant. She should have completely ignored the twins for the rest of the game.
Instead, she focused on the high durability targets.
Instead, she respected a unit that had already explicitly proven its mathematical deficiency. She attacked the anvil. She poured her high-value, low-volume warp blasts into the Riptides with their massive, invulnerable saves when she should have shattered the scalpel.
An inversion of the optimal targeting matrix.
Had she inverted her targeting matrix, allowing her swarming biologicals to simply bog down the heavy Tau mecha in melee combat, while simultaneously directing her hyper-lethal, armor-melting ranged bioplasma into the fragile Toughness 6 chassis of the twins, the Tau scoring engine would have been instantly neutralized on turn 3.
So, synthesizing this data, the twins survived the engagement primarily through unintentional psychological warfare, Senior Auditor.
They survived strictly because of a technicality, Scribe.
Yeah.
They are a paper tiger. The Tau force had reached total operational culmination by the end of Turn 5. The Tyranid swarm had fully breached the deployment zone. The Tau heavy mechanized division was largely reduced to slag. Scribe, I want you to run a predictive model. Project the exact mathematical trajectory of this physical engagement into a hypothetical battle round 6. Ignore the game rules. Run the biological consumption math.
Calculating predictive modeling. Analyzing remaining Tyranid biological mass versus remaining Tau structural integrity, factoring in current board positions and projected melee engagement ranges. Lord Krauss, the predictive algorithms indicate that in a Battle Round 6 scenario, the Tyranid swarm would achieve a 100% biological consumption of all remaining Tau assets on the physical board. The mathematical probability of Tau survival past Turn 5 drops to precisely 0.0%.
Precisely. The true anchor of this game was not the Twin Lance. It wasn't even Commander Farsight and his desperate rescue attacks. The true, singular anchor preventing a total Tau defeat was the hard artificial limit of Turn 5. Winning by the bell when your army is mere seconds away from total, unmitigated biological eradication is a symptom of systemic list-building failure.
The data supports this conclusion.
The Twins are a participation trophy. They are a visually impressive, expensive piece of plastic designed entirely to reward casual weekend players for hiding in their deployment zones and surviving non-optimized games. To pretend for even 1 second that they belong at the absolute apex of competitive Tau mathematical meta is an insult to the rigorous, uncompromising doctrines required to pilot the faction successfully against competent adversaries.
The civilian community will not like this harsh assessment, Lord Krauss. They have already allocated their personal financial resources to purchase the models.
Let them cope. Let them write off the expenditure on their personal ledgers as a psychological trauma mitigation tax. The empirical math on the board proves, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that the Twin Lance is a heavily taxed, functionally inefficient unit that fundamentally requires half of your total army economy just to babysit it. The broader community is currently running on pure marketing momentum. We, Scribe, are running on tactical reality.
Awaiting further instructions, Lord Krauss. The room is quiet. The ventilation fan continues to hum.
I am just sitting here, leaning back in this creaking chair, looking at this data slate servitor. Look at these casualty reports from across the sector. All these resources, all this finite capital, all these lives poured into a single, highly taxed, low-yield vanity project.
The numbers reflect a widespread systemic loss.
It is just another quiet tragedy in a dying galaxy. A piece of plastic propaganda sold to desperate, terrified commanders who look up at the stars and wish for a Vanguard assassin to descend from the heavens and save them from the encroaching swarm. But all they bought was an overpriced paperweight.
A paperweight lacking proper geometric output.
They stripped away the unit's primary, defining utility, its unparalleled movement, and forced it to fight a static, bloody war of attrition it was mathematically designed by its creators to lose. The ledger never truly balances, Scribe. We just move the numbers around the spreadsheet until the Tyranids eventually break through the doors and eat the accountants.
Shall I close the Analytica archives for today, Senior Auditor?
Yes, power down the catagitators. But first, the final mandate to the citizens. Before I close this ledger, I want all of you to ask yourselves one lingering question in the dark. If the manufacturer can mathematically manipulate you into buying a functionally deficient unit simply by making the plastic look heroic on a picked feed, what other foundational tactics in your playbook are actually just expensive marketing lies? Think about your next army list very, very carefully. To those still connected to this broadcast, for the love of the Empire, tap that like and hit subscribe.
Archiving the transmission now.
Dismissed. Pay your tithes, citizens.